Hey, I get it when you're setting up a home theater or just trying to upgrade a garage-style audio rig. It feels like there's a million tiny decisions you have to make. You're looking at specs, reading the fine print, and probably wondering if that extra $200 you're about to spend will actually make a difference in your everyday listening. Before you click Add to Cart, let's walk through the Sony Mobile ES 10.1 high-resolution digital media receiver and see if it really solves the problems you're dealing with. Link is in the description if you want to check the product details on Amazon. First off, who am I? I'm not a professional installer. I'm a regular guy who spends a few evenings a week wiring up a decent sound system for family movie nights and weekend DJ sets. I've owned a couple of older receivers that promised high resolution but ended up sounding just like a good Bluetooth speaker. The Sony Mobile ES promises a 10.1-inch capacitive touchscreen, LDAC wireless streaming, and a single DIN chassis that can slide into tighter spaces. The promise is tempting, especially if your current setup feels cramped or you've got a small AV rack that barely fits a full-height unit. Let's start with the size. The 10.1-inch HD 1280720 screen is noticeably larger than the typical 5-inch panels you see on most entry-level network receivers. In my garage, where the receiver sits on a shelf next to a subwoofer, that bigger screen actually makes a big difference when you're juggling inputs. You can see the source, the sampling rate, and even the file format WAV, FLAC, ALAC, or DSD without squinting. The anti-glare coating also helps when the room gets a little bright from a TV backlight. For someone who likes to tinker, that visual feedback cuts down on guesswork. You won't be stuck wondering whether you're playing a 192 kHz file or a 44.1 kHz track. Now, the real question: does the touchscreen feel responsive enough for daily use? The capacitive layer is a 4-way adjustable touch panel, which means you can scroll, swipe, and tap with relatively low latency. In practice, I found the response to be snappy when I'm switching from a streaming source to a USB drive. However, it does take a moment for the UI to redraw if you're loading a large DSD folder, so if you're planning to run a massive library of uncompressed files, give it a couple of seconds before you start skimming. It's not a deal breaker, but it's something to be aware of if you expect instant switching like you get on a laptop. One of the headline features is LDAC support. LDAC is Sony's proprietary codec that can push up to 990 kbps over Bluetooth, theoretically preserving more of the original high-resolution signal compared to standard SBC or AAC. In real-world tests with a mid-range Android phone and a pair of high-end bookshelf speakers, the wireless stream sounded noticeably richer than the same track played through a regular Bluetooth connection. The difference was most pronounced on airy, high-frequency content. Think of a live jazz sax solo or a finely detailed acoustic guitar. If you already have a solid Bluetooth source and want to ditch a bunch of cables, the LDAC capability is a practical win. The single DIN chassis is another thing worth highlighting. Most receivers sit in a full-height slot, which can be a problem if you've got limited space behind a TV or in a compact media center. This unit's single DIN footprint lets you mount it horizontally or even slide it into a slim rack. That saves you a couple of inches of depth, which is a tangible benefit if your cabinet is already packed with a sub, speakers, and a TV. The downside is you lose a few expansion options that full-height units often provide, like additional HDMI inputs or multi-zone outputs. If you're looking for a simple stereo or Dolby Atmos front-end and you already have a separate preamp for other zones, the single DIN form factor works well. If you hope to build a full-house multi-room setup that relies on a single receiver, you might feel the pinch. The receiver handles native 192 kHz/24-bit WAV, FLAC, ALAC, and even DSD file playback. What does that mean in day-to-day use? For most streaming services, you'll never see those ultra-high-resolution files, but if you own a collection of ripped CDs, high-resolution FLACs, or DSD recordings from a SACD, this receiver will play them without downsampling. I tested a 24-bit/96 kHz FLAC album of classical piano. The detail was subtle but present. The low end felt tighter, and the ambience of the concert hall came through more cleanly than on my older receiver that only handled up to 48 kHz. If your library is packed with high-resolution files, that native support translates to genuine listening benefits. If you mostly stream playlists on Spotify or Apple Music, you won't notice much difference from a standard receiver. Connectivity is fairly straightforward. The USB Type-C port lets you hook up a modern smartphone directly, which is handy if you prefer to stream via the phone's music app instead of a dedicated network player. The front and rear 5V preamp outputs also allow you to